From awaytogarden.com and robinhoodradio.com, this is A Way to Garden with Margaret Roach, your weekly invitation to dig in and grow.
My, how times have changed, I write in the beginning of my new old book, A Way to Garden, which is being published this month in a whole revamped edition, a shocking 21 years after it first appeared. New plants, new techniques, new knowledge, and lots of evolving science to guide today's gardeners, too. My friend Joe Lamp'l, host of the Emmy-winning PBS show Growing a Greener World, has been teaching people to garden through the media those same 20 years. And we got into a chat the other day about some of the changes in that time span, about things we still do the same way and what we do differently. We want to let you in on the conversation, but first these messages.
Underwriting support from Timber Press, your go-to resource for books in gardening and nature. Whether you're a new gardener, a professional at the top of your field, or a reader interested in the wonders of the natural world, their books are there to help you grow. timberpress.com. Underwriting support from High Mowing Organic Seeds, the first independently owned farm-based seed company proudly serving organic gardeners and farmers with 100% organic and non-GMO vegetable, herb, and flower seeds. highmowingseeds.com/awaytogarden.
Besides his Emmy-winning TV show, Joe Lamp'l creates the joegardener.com website and companion podcast, has a big Facebook group, and a new online organic gardening course called Organic Gardening Academy. Like me, he's been an organic gardener from the start of his backyard adventures, and I welcome him back to the show today. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Margaret. How are you?
Hey, I'm a little freaked out. It's spring, Joe, you know. I see on all your media, I see 473,000 seedlings, so you must be a little freaked out too. You're propagating like mad, huh?
I am, but kind of like you, after a while it gets to be a kind of old hat. I still get excited and a little bit nervous too, but I always admire you on those days that you have those open garden tours and you have thousands of people coming through.
Hundreds.
But the day before, you're as cool as a cucumber, and I just don't know how you do that.
Oh, it's my meds. No. No, that's it. I shouldn't be funny about that, but no, it's not. So we should start by saying that this show is kind of a companion show to quote, part one, which runs this week on your Joe Gardener podcast. So we'll tell people how to get there. And they may want to listen to yours first because we did them one, too. You know, we did yours first. Mm-hmm. And I think you're celebrating sort of an anniversary recently of that podcast, right? Aren't you?
We hit the big 100. So
100 episodes. Yeah.
100 episodes. That's right. They say if you can survive 7 episodes in the podcast world, you're something. And you and I have certainly rounded that number several times over.
Oh, totally. Good.
Yeah, but I love it, though. I love it. And you have you probably are the most frequent guest simply because I love having conversations with you. And this one is as good as any.
Well, as I said in the intro, we want to you and I ended up having this conversation before we ended up taping your show and then doing this. And, we wanted to let people in on it because a lot has changed. And so, last year or so, year and a half or so ago, when I was finishing redoing the A Way to Garden book from 21 years prior, you were also, and we were on the phone sometimes and emailing each other sometimes, you were creating your online Organic Gardening Academy curriculum. So in a sense, we were both picking our brains, going through our archives, both literal and mental archives, trying to figure out what makes the cut, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's so much information, and as long as we've been gardening, that's a lot of information.
Yeah.
And then how do you call it down to hold people's attention and keep it relevant and, kind of eliminate or cull the things that just no longer have that sort of significance or importance anymore? It's a challenge.
Right. And clearly 20 years ago or whatever, some of your earliest stories or, whatever medium they were in, and mine as well. I mean, I wouldn't give that recommendation anymore that I might have given or the expert I was interviewing might have given then because we just didn't know things we know now.
That is so true with technology and just the different ways that we've been able to study things. There's so many things. I started making a list, Margaret, knowing that we would be chatting about some of these things. And the list grew long quickly of those things that we do now that we did then that we don't do now or know better, at least anyway.
Right. And so, for instance, what's on that list?
Well, and here's the thing, I try to put myself in someone else's shoes because, as you said, we've been organic gardeners since the beginning.
Yes.
But I do have a sense, and hopefully you concur on this, that we talk a lot more these days about soil building. It used to be feed the plant. What could you throw on that plant to feed the plant?
Right.
But did we ever really talk about feeding the soil so the soil can feed the plant? Maybe we did. I just don't remember. But I do know now, maybe it's because you and I talk about it so much, but I hear it all the time, and I'm glad for that.
Yeah. And I think some of the old magazines, the Rodale type of, always spoke to that. And in organic farming, it always spoke to that. But in gardening, horticulture, whatever, it was like about, look at this gorgeous new plant I can get, and should I give it some blue liquid?
Yes.
That was what it was about. It was about miracles, quote unquote.
Well, and what I do like though is that because in this online gardening academy that we formed, we're really targeting a younger and up and coming gardener who really needs to sort of be guided or have somebody to kind of take them by the hands and show them the ropes in the way that you and I would perceive it to be the right way. But intuitively, or at least their sense these days, is not to see what they can do to feed the plant. They're already kind of dialed in, at least, to knowing more of an ethical or sustainable or a lighter footprint way of doing it. And that, I love that just seems to be the norm rather than the exception these days.
In the same way that people are shopping differently for food, or a lot of people are. There's more like, where'd it come from? How was it grown? Does it contain this or that? So and I think that's the connection between that, as you say, the word sustainable has become more of a word where I don't think that was something that a lot of us talked about earlier on. So there we were. I'm writing a book and you're making a curriculum, and we're sort of like, hey, what's the best way to teach people fill in the blank? Because, again, over the years, you've interviewed for the TV show and for other media, you've interviewed many, many experts along the way on sometimes the same subject, maybe 3 different people, 5 years apart each one or whatever, and so have I, right? So it's like, well, what is the best way to do, and I don't know what topic we should start with, but there certainly are a lot of, how times have changed revelations.
Well, Margaret, do you remember how when we used to plant a tree or a shrub or put something in the ground and how they used to talk about amending the planting hole and make it as nice and comfy as you could?
Yes.
Remember that?
And we would get peat moss. That was when was the last time you bought a bale of peat moss?
It's been almost since the beginning, but I remember in the beginning that seemed to be all I ever bought because that's all anybody ever talked about that we should use.
And now we know it's not a sustainable resource. We want to use the minimum amount that we can of it. Maybe in some of our germinating or potting mediums, but we don't, that we buy bagged or whatever, but we don't want to use it as a soil amendment because, again, it's not sustainable and it's not the best thing anyway. So we learned about composting instead, for example. And also we learned about, hey, don't give that tree or shrub that you're planting a 5-foot wide hole if its root ball is, if it's in a 5-gallon pot. Like, don't make some crater and fill it with all this good stuff, right? Let it go into the native soil, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just backfill, break up the clumps and backfill with a native soil. Or alternatively, you could amend it out to beyond what the roots would eventually get to if you really want to go crazy with it and put some good stuff in there. But I don't know anybody quite energetic enough to do that.
Right. Maybe it's just that we're getting older. You're not as old as I am. But I was thinking about something else that's changed just because right now I'm doing it, the spring cleanup. And, even my spring cleanup is different in the sense that only a few years ago, I learned from some people at Cornell at their former project called the Habitat Network that all of these wonderful beneficial creatures that are going to help feed birds, baby birds, or are going to help do pest control duty, like spiders, for instance, or certain kinds of caterpillars, they're all in the leaf litter or the debris on the floor of the garden, right? That's where they are. Like, a lot of them are tucked in for the winter. And if you clean up too soon in the spring, before they have a span of maybe 4 or 5, 50-plus degree days, and you go with your leaf vacuum, which is a scary thing anyway, or even a rake, and you disturb that, you kill off a lot of those good helper creatures that are so needed in the environment. I didn't know I was doing something unhabitat-like, you know what I mean, by cleaning up too early in spring. I didn't know.
Well, and as a tidy gardener myself, and I used to give presentations like this about the things I do to create a healthy garden. In my presentations, I always showed a really tidy picture in the fall where everything all, deadheaded and everything was, you couldn't, nothing in the way, no debris, nothing. And I was so disgusted when I went through my slides and I saw that was still in some of my presentations, and I quickly made some changes because, we now know better that that's not what you do. A tidy garden is not necessarily a healthy garden.
And messy, and similarly to what I'm saying, don't clean up too soon in the spring. Give them a chance to wake up and get out of that leaf litter. Also, let a lot of your leaves fall. I don't let them fall and stay piled up in places where maybe I have March and April bulbs coming up, for instance, because it mats them down. But especially in the outer areas of the garden, I've let lots of areas go unraked in the fall because all these good creatures are in there. So it's kind of different.
Yeah, and I can attest to the life in your garden is amazing because you allow it to be so. You don't micromanage it, and it shows. It's beautiful.
Have you changed aesthetic things? Are you in the same house? You're in Atlanta, we should say to people. I should have said that. And are you in the same house as you were like 20-ish years ago?
No, I'm not. I'm I'm in my third cycle of houses in 20 years. But I've been here on this farm for 7 years.
Okay.
And heavily native, but not all native. But definitely, that's one of the things that's changed is looking for plants that serve more than one purpose rather than maybe just aesthetic as we used to buy so often. Now, as you, Margaret, you're a great example of this. You talk about how the birds taught you to garden.
Yeah.
And so a lot of your landscape is related to what feeds the birds. And I'm the same way now. And I know that across the country and beyond, we're talking more about that as far as the plant choices that we make. And that is certainly the case with me. And so not as tidy as I used to be, for sure, but by design.
Right, and it's not outdoor decorating. That's not the goal here, right? It's not outdoor decorating. It's really building communities and sustaining habitat. And yes, we want the showy, beautiful plants that have multi-season interest because we want to encourage ourselves to keep on going. And there's a little reward in the ornamental, beautiful things, but we also want to be thinking about the bigger picture. And I think that's come home a lot in recent years for all of us.
Well, yes, it has. And, Doug Tallamy, the likes of Doug Tallamy, Bringing Nature Home, and others are talking about this. And I, too, have always, you and I have a thing about nature, and I think we have this real appreciation for it and the respect for it. We want to do what we can to help it. But I probably thought about that. Well, I know I thought a lot about that back in the day, but nothing like I think about today. Like I think every time I do something in the garden, well, what sort of impact is this going to have, or how can I help more? Maybe is even the bigger question.
So the dominoes, which when you trip one, does the next one fall, and what is it, and what's its impact? Yeah, thinking, seeing a chain of events, a food chain and a life cycle, it's really. To me, that's the best part, but I didn't necessarily understand that when I began gardening 40 years ago or when I got my place 30-something years ago. Obviously I didn't know that stuff.
And can I give you a specific example of that? On a podcast a while back, I interviewed Dr. Stephen Kress with the Audubon Society. We were talking about the use of pesticides, and I was asking a question about what sort of impact does backyard garden pesticides have on birds, for example. Out of curiosity, I wanted to know. And he said, the conservative estimate is that at least 7 million backyard songbirds die each year just by eating insects that have been killed through backyard pesticides.
Wow.
And that was a conservative number because you go online and look at that number and, some people add another zero to that at least. And it's scary either way. Right.
So again, things we didn't know. It's not that everybody used to line up at the garden center to buy pesticides because they wanted to hurt birds.
No.
Or insects or what. You know what I mean? They wanted to, they thought they were supposed to do, as we were just talking about, obsessive garden sanitation. They thought they were supposed to have everything perfect. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you mulch the same or differently? Do you buy mulch? Do you make anything different about, like, say, mulching or whatever? Any
Well,
things like
I've
that?
always been a mulch lover. I don't know if you knew that, but I always have, and I appreciate all the things it does. But for me now, I'm good with free arborist wood chips because I know that,
Yeah.
I'm keeping them from being disposed elsewhere, and who knows, whether that's going to a landfill or whatever. But I just know how good they can be as they break down, and that is an interesting question because, well, I'll get to that in a second. My favorite mulch is just using nature's gift every fall of shredded leaves. I take the
Yeah.
leaves and I shred them up and
Yeah.
I corral them, and then I put them in my vegetable garden. And to me, there's just nothing better than the feel of shredded leaf mulch going around your plants, and then knowing it's going to break down and improve the soil.
Yeah.
So that's my mulch thing. But the other thing about things that have changed regarding mulch. Do you remember, Margaret, how often we used to hear about nitrogen depletion and not to use
Yes.
fresh wood chips
It
around any plant?
It robs nitrogen from the soil. That was the quote, right? Is that
Right.
That's what, yeah. Mhm.
Which, if you mix it into the soil as it's breaking down, it can, pull nitrogen from the
Right.
soil.
Right.
But what we never, that part never got told. It was just don't use it anywhere if it's fresh. But Dr. Linda Chalker-Scott and others have done studies about this as well. And the only nitrogen that's being drawn up is within 1/16 of an inch of fresh arborist wood chips at the freshest point. So the risk of it actually pulling from the root zone when it's used as mulch is nil. So, go forth and use
Right.
fresh arborist wood chips as mulch.
Right. And I love the shredded leaves as well. And the one thing I'll say about that, and it's sort of, how times have changed yet again. I don't shred them in the fall because of what I said before, because there's all these little creatures. So I'm letting some of them lie in the outer areas and so forth where I can. And I'm doing that shredding job. So there's sort of, they're decaying a little bit in place.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm picking those up, more of them than I used to, up in the spring, and doing that once everybody's kind of flown the coop,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's ironically, I let my leaves lie. I don't
Yes.
even use my leaves. I let them, like you, stay
Yes.
in the woods.
Yes.
I'm collecting my neighbor's leaves that are set at
I know.
the curb.
I
Yeah.
know. Yeah. No, it's true. It's really true. Because many people don't understand this, and they still see it as debris, yard waste.
Yeah,
Right.
I
Right.
know.
Right.
Yeah.
Biggest mistakes? Any big mistakes to confess?
Well, I embrace all mistakes, and I think I've shared my biggest mistake before was just using composted horse manure that had
right.
persistent herbicides in it.
Killer
And
compost.
Killer compost. And as
Right.
much as I warned people not to do that, there was a time where I was trying to fill my garden beds, and I had this big mountain of fresh, or not fresh, very aged composted horse manure because we have
Right.
horses. But I didn't allow myself to think that I could possibly have that in my composted horse manure, and I did. And I didn't do the bioassay test first, which I should have, like I tell everybody else to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it went into the soil and ruined my soil for 4 years.
Yeah.
So that was a big mistake.
Yeah.
But I learned. And here's the thing. I shared my mistake publicly and let everybody know. And so I hopefully have helped other people avoid the same mistake that I made.
Yeah, and what we'll do is, now that you brought that up, that's a good one. I'll link to our conversation about that, where you give a lot of information about it, so people can understand how to source some of the materials they do need to buy, and so forth, and about manure and whatever. Yeah, I mean, are there any bad habits that you're still trying to break, or that you've just made peace with and figured, hey, I'm always going to have this bad habit? I mean, I'm asking you all these cranky questions. But
So that's the same as usual with us, Margaret. But
I
that's
know.
fine with me. I admit to being a plantaholic, so I have a hard time controlling myself. But the problem is I get them home, and I still have a fair amount of places to plant, but I don't get around to putting them into the ground. So the part two of that is paralysis by analysis. I get the plant, bring it home. I'm not really worried about where I'm going to put it. I'll figure I'll find a place. But the problem is I overthink it for too long, and a year or two will go by, and that plant is still in its container because I just couldn't bring myself to find the perfect place, which is so bad.
Right. So the poor thing's suffering, huh?
Yeah.
You know
what about you?
Well,
Can I ask you that? What is your?
Yeah, and but on that subject, it's a good year if I only have a couple of pots sitting in the driveway, still in their nursery pots, right? And one thing I have started doing with those is in the vegetable garden, which up here in the north, is empty from October or whatever until, except for where the garlic is planted, until the next spring. I heal them in. I'll take them out of their pots and plunge, the root masses so that they're not so constricted.
Yeah.
And I know it's extra work, but that's what I do and it seems to keep them in better condition. So, and it means transplanting twice, but that's what I do anyway. What's my worst? I will say that the shopping, without knowing where the plant is going. And the really best gardeners I know, especially the best design type people I know, never, ever, ever do that.
Really?
They just, they might buy one thing, but they don't just wander around and come home with a carload of stuff and think it's going to make a garden. They do plan.
Yeah.
So I would say that's probably my weakness also. If I go to an unusual plant nursery, a place that has special things, I'm going to want to bring them home with no idea what the heck I'm going to do with them. That is a problem. It's fun.
Well, we could have worse problems. I
suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on your list, you said you made a list. Was there any other things in the last 3-4 minutes that we have? Were there other things that you said how it had changed a lot for you?
Well, I think when we talk about soil building, back to that for a second, I think the conversations around vermicomposting and biochar and mycorrhizal fungi, those, who talked about that 20 years ago?
And
not many people.
I'm sort of, whereas 20 years ago, worms ate my garbage, what's her name? Appelhoff, Mary Appelhoff, was that her name?
That sounds right.
Book was like a cult favorite and one of my favorite things. I'm very shy about vermicomposting now because of these Asian jumping worms and the possibility that the eggs, or whatever it's called, of those can be in purchased worms, and so I'm not so, that's not such a thing I'd want to be writing about or recommending without disclaimers right now.
Well, and there you go. There's a topic that never came up before either, but now everybody's talking about the jumping worms and the risk of that. So
right. We thought earthworms were good, but maybe they're not all good. And oh boy, what does that mean? Yeah. So what else was on that list of yours?
Well, some of us still have lawns out there, and I know you never do a thing to yours other than cut it once or twice a year. But, the bagging versus the grass cycling. I remember back in the day when I would, really love my lawn, and I would bag the heck out of it. But now I can't imagine doing that unless I took the clippings to the compost bin as a nitrogen source. But grass cycling is such a no-brainer these days, and it makes it a lot easier. So that's one thing. And then, just how we water in general. Like, for example, with the lawns, I remember seeing people water in the middle of the day or at night. Or, a little bit every day, which rather than just, infrequently but deeply, which we know now is a better method of doing it to promote deeper root growth and better plant health.
Yeah.
And then, I'm sorry, I'm just going.
No, we have another minute or so, so go for it.
Well, I love the fact that technology has become friends to gardeners as well.
Yeah.
If you can get over the intimidation factor in these days with the ease of use of apps, and there are just so many great ways to, if you're not a write it down kind of person with journaling, you don't have to be anymore, because you can keep great records and take pictures and dictate into your phone and give yourself access to information from last year or the year before or even longer through these online journaling apps on your phone. And if you start seeds indoors these days, you've got lighting options that you didn't have a couple years ago. And just the access to information, I think, is just making us all better, smarter gardeners. And hey, gardening podcast like yours.
It never, we didn't have a free thing like that we could access. You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
So Joe, I'm going to remind people that this is sort of like part 2 of a conversation that began on your show, and that is a little bit different but very related. And so I'll give all the links. And I don't think that registration is open right now for your course again, but I'm going to tell people about it and where to read up about it. Is it time yet, or it's not time yet?
Well, you know what? We're going to open registration up for a week. When your podcast goes live, we're going to have it open and available.
Okay. All right. So I'll give all the details on that, and of course on the Joe Gardner podcast and website and all that kind of good stuff. Thank you so much, Joe Lample, for being here today.
Thank you, Margaret.
Underwriting support from High Mowing Organic Seeds, the first independently owned farm-based seed company proudly serving organic gardeners and farmers with 100% organic and non-GMO vegetable, herb, and flower seeds. HighMowingSeeds.com/awaytogarden. Underwriting support from Timber Press, your go-to resource for books in gardening and nature. Whether you're a new gardener, a professional at the top of your field, or a reader interested in the wonders of the natural world, their books are there to help you grow. TimberPress.com.
Now, don't miss an episode. You can subscribe free to the podcast version on Stitcher or iTunes or Spotify, and you can find me anytime at awaytogarden.com or on Facebook or Instagram as @awaytogarden. And happy gardening meantime.
Away to Garden with Margaret Roach is a joint production of awaytogarden.com and the smallest NPR station in the nation, Robin Hood Radio.